Hello friends, my name is Dasha. Welcome back to my channel, and welcome to today's video, which is going to be a set of recommendations for the prompts of my readathon, A Game of Tomes, The Origin Story. If you have not yet seen the announcement video, please go check it out. I don't want to spoil anything for you, but essentially I am hosting a readathon with two friends, Ray and Robin. We are having a mini round in the beginning of November. All the details will of course be in that announcement video. If you want full details, I'll have links down below as well, of course, but if you don't want to get spoiled, I'd go watch that first, click around the website, you know, all that kind of stuff. Basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the path that I will be taking and then give a few recommendations for some of the other paths that have prompts that I can actually give you recommendations for. Since we did try to make this readathon as open to as many people as possible, some of the prompts are a little bit open-ended and very specific to you, such as things like anticipated reads or 5-star predictions. So maybe I can't give you specific recommendations for that, but we're gonna do our best. One last thing to note is that Ray and Robin will both have recommendation videos up as well on their channels. Those will be linked so you guys can go check those out. Please go give them a watch. I love those girls to death, and I'm so excited to host this with them, and I'm sure they'll have really different recommendations too. So my logic with a lot of these is obviously everyone's reading speed is a little bit different, but I'm gonna try to pick books that you could probably read within that 2-week period. Hopefully, there are only 3 prompts per path, so you should be able to figure out your TBR so you can read all 3 books, hopefully. We're gonna start off with the group prompt, which is an anticipated read. So all I want to say about this one is that it is any kind of anticipated read. It doesn't even have to be an anticipated release. Anything that you are really pumped for, just read it, have a good time, enjoy yourself. This is your chance to just go for something that you've been dying to pick up but weren't able to, maybe because of other readathons. So go nuts, read what you want for this one. Now, I myself will be taking the Stark path. I am a huge fan of the Starks throughout the series. They've always been kind of the family I've gravitated to. So my path starts with the twins. I have to read a book with 2 words in the title, so I have a few recs for those. One of these I read earlier this year, absolutely loved, Battle Royale. Listen, I know this seems like a huge book, but you race through it so quickly, I promise you. This is a story of a group of 9th graders. Their class is sent off to fight to the death on this remote island as part of the authoritarian government regime. This book is super fast-paced. It's perfect for fall because you're kind of stuck inside reading a ton anyways, and it's got this really dark, almost horror-esque, gritty feel to it, so I think this would be perfect to pick up during the readathon, and Battle Royale has 2 words in the title. Another good, more kind of thriller-type option would be Sharp Objects by Gillian Flynn. So this is a mystery about a reporter that goes back to her hometown following the murder and disappearance of a couple of really young girls, and once she's home, all these kind of old feelings start coming back up, old classmates start talking to her, and it's just really dark. If you love small town vibes, if you love fucked up female characters, I think this book is great. Again, reads really quickly because it's more of like a mystery thriller. The atmosphere is perfect. Borderline gothic, which is perfect for like beginning of November. It's still fall but getting into winter, and this is one that I really quite enjoyed when I read it. If you're looking to pick up something a little bit different, might I suggest Full Metal Alchemist. So technically it is 2 words. This is a manga series about 2 brothers, and they have been disfigured in an alchemical accident. They're on a quest to find the Philosopher's Stone and restore their bodies to their original state, but along the way there's all sorts of little side quests and distractions. I absolutely love this series. It is such a fun series. It is so funnily illustrated, and honestly, it's just like laugh out loud hilarious. Again, manga is perfect for readathons because it's nice and short and quick, and this one is one of my personal favorite series of all time, period. So I would really recommend this one personally. I have not stopped screaming about this book since I read it. I know I only started talking about it on the channel in my September wrap-up, but like, guys, Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. I know this looks like a thick fantasy, but I promise this did not take any time to get through. You want to get through it so quickly. This is a very expansive, epic adult fantasy set in this like mythical South America with pre-Columbian history and mythology and lore behind it. It's absolutely breathtaking. You're following a boy who at a young age was disfigured to become a vessel for God by his own mother. You are following a siren who is a pirateer, and she is tasked with bringing him to this religious city, and you're following a priestess at this city. It is immaculate. It is beautiful. It is such a breathtaking start to a series. I think if you're a huge fantasy fan, you would really enjoy this. I'm personally obsessed. One more, just to give a nonfiction one in there, because y'all know me, A Permanent Record by Edward Snowden. This was one of my favorite books of last year. This is a part memoir, autobiography, part deep dive into both Edward Snowden's life, his upbringing, but also the way that he uncovered the CIA plot to spy on all American citizens. It is gripping. Honestly, I didn't think I would enjoy the parts that were talking about his life, but it really, really helped bring the whole story together. I absolutely loved this book. I thought it was really, really different. This guy is clearly like an absolute genius and just trying to do the right thing. It's such a interesting book, and I think, again, it seems a little long, but I think for a readathon it would work, because once you start reading, you cannot stop. It's absolutely fascinating. I love this book to pieces, and I would love if more people picked it up, to be honest. And the other prompt for the Stark Path is a book that has wintry vibes. Now, I got a lot for this because I think this is a really, really fun category. So first, thrillers I think are perfect when it comes to wintry vibes. So No Exit by Taylor Adams is one that I personally really, really enjoyed. I read this one so quickly. I was on the edge of my seat. A girl in college is basically going home to see her mother, who is extremely sick. The problem is there's a major snowstorm, so she gets kind of stranded at a rest stop with a bunch of strangers. When she's walking around trying to get cell signal outside, she notices that someone's van has a dog cage in it that has a child in it. And it's this really wintry atmosphere. You feel cold and miserable knowing that, like, if you step outside where it's probably safer and you're away from a psychopath that's keeping a child locked up, you're gonna be cold and miserable. If you've ever lived in Canada, you know what the winters are like, and that's what I was picturing. However, if you stay inside where yes, it's warm, but you're also stuck with a psychopath. So gripping stuff, really a lot of fun. I also have Misery by Stephen King here. This is the classic story of the fan love gone wrong. A famous writer gets into a car crash. The woman who rescues him is his biggest fan, and she holds him captive until he rewrites the ending to her favorite book series. The crash happens during a snowstorm, so it's definitely got those kind of wintry vibes, but also the isolation that you feel when reading through the author's eyes is just very, very wintry. Stephen King is actually a really good pick for this in general, because The Shining is also very wintry, because it follows a family who is sent to this big hotel in the mountains, super snowy, isolated. The father got a job as kind of taking care of the hotel during the winter when there's no guests, and so his young family came with him, and you really start to feel the isolation and like the cabin fever being stuck in this beautiful hotel in the middle of the snowy mountains. It's perfect when it comes to those wintry vibes, and I personally loved the book. We could, however, go quite obvious. The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. This is an adult fantasy set in the middle of the woods in like medieval Russia. You're following a young girl who is able to converse with the old gods, the old spirits of her area. However, when her father gets a new wife, she is a very devout Christian, and she kind of forbids our main character from conversing with the gods, leading to potential disastrous consequences. This book did have all those very snowy, beautiful vibes. Very dark and cruel. I actually DNF'd this book, but I still would recommend it. It just personally didn't work for me. Similarly, Spinning Silver by Naomi Novik. I did not love this book. I finished it, at least I didn't DNF it. This is a Rumpelstiltskin retelling, founded in a lot of Polish and other Eastern European mythology and lore, and it is a very interesting book. There is a lot of interesting concepts in there, a lot of very quiet fantasy in the sense that it's not big epic battles and great kings and all this stuff. It's just very quiet. You're focused a lot on the woman in the story, and it has those very quiet, isolating, wintry vibes. I will mention a nonfiction recommendation as well. Dead Mountain by Donnie Eichberg, I believe, is the author. This is the story of the Dyatlov Pass incident. So if you are not aware of this, basically there was a group of hikers in Russia. A lot of Russian recommendations. Shocker, right? Basically, a group of college kids went off for a hike in the mountains, and they were found in very alarming states. Some of them had stripped their clothes off, one of them was missing their tongue, there was just bodies everywhere. It was a complete disaster. No one really knew what happened. Of course, theories range from the somewhat plausible, like military experiments, to the completely absurd, i.e. aliens. And this book really tries to get into the nitty-gritty of what happened. The author travels to Russia, hikes along their path, talks to people who might have met them on their way, and eventually puts forth his own theory of what he thinks happened. Again, because you are reading about this snowy hike that these kids took, and you are getting different narrations of both the author's interviews and his travels, but also a play-by-play account of what the kids did leading up to the hike and how their hike went up until, you know, we have no idea of what happened. It's terrifying because you're reading the path that the kids took and what they probably had to do and how cold they were and what they had to pack, and it's just, it gives you all of that winter terrifying, I don't want to be caught in the woods but these crazy people are doing it vibes. Alright, so the next path I'm going to cover is the Targaryen path. So again, our first initial prompt stays the same, read an anticipated book, but for the next one you will have to pick a book that is set near or on a large body of water. So this one's a little vague. This was the only one that we were like, okay, hopefully people can find something, but that's why we've got recommendations for you. If you've been interested in reading These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong, you are in luck. This is set on the Shanghai River because it is set in 1920s Shanghai, and the river actually plays a very integral role to this book. So this is a 1920s young adult reimagining of Romeo and Juliet. Romeo and Juliet are the heirs to opposing warring gangs in 1920s Shanghai. I think I said that. But essentially you are following them as they try to figure out what has been cursing both of their clans. There's been a lot of death and it seems to be possibly supernatural, and you're just trying to figure out what's going on. Again, like I said, the river plays a huge part of the book. There are a ton of scenes set along the bank of the river, so it plays a very large part in this. You would probably not have known if you were just looking at reading this, so I'm telling you now, this contains a large body of water. There's an excuse to go read it, especially since Our Violent Ends is coming out soon, the sequel, and I can't wait to read it personally. Also, because I just can't resist, I gotta plug Black Sun. So Black Sun is actually set on a large sea, the Crescent Sea, and it plays an integral part in the book as you are following a pirateer who is pirateer even a word? I feel like I've said it like 3 times. She's not quite a pirate. She's a captain. She's a captain. Anyways, she has a ship. She's on the sea. She's a siren. So the sea plays a large part in this book. Another fantasy I'll quickly mention is The Boneshard Daughter by Andrea Stewart. So this is an adult high fantasy that just came out last year. The sequel's coming out end of November, and this is set in this world where all the people live on these like floating islands that have their own migration patterns. It's so cool, and the magic is very similar to Foundry Side. It's kind of like coding, but this time in this book it's more with like bone shards, and you're following the daughter of the emperor who is learning this bone shard magic, and a few other POVs that are just like absolutely fascinating, including a smuggler with the cutest animal sidekick. And this book is just amazing. It looks very thick if you see it. Do not be scared. I read this in 2 friggin' days. It was so good, so quick, absolutely breathtaking, and it fits the prompt perfectly because it's set on this mythical sea and on these islands. Another one I'll give to go more a little bit into horror perhaps, Gyo by Junji Ito. So the tagline for this is "The Death Stench Creeps," because it's basically about this small town on the side of the ocean, and there's this terrible smell that starts emanating, and then the fish start behaving a little weirdly. It is very centrally focused on the ocean. It is a horror manga, in case I forgot to mention that. So that means you'll get through it pretty quickly, and obviously it's still the remnants of spooky season in November, so it's a pretty good time to pick this up, I think. If you're looking for a bit more thriller, I have 2 recommendations. So there is The Last Time I Lied by Riley Sager. I'm not a huge Riley Sager fan, but this book I quite enjoyed. You are following a woman who went to a summer camp 15 years ago and her bunkmates all disappeared, and then you're following her in the present time when she is returning to the camp as a counselor slash like teacher there, and she's trying to figure out what happened to her bunkmates. And this is set by a lake at this summer camp for girls, and the lake is again quite central to the story. It has a lot to do with the events of the book, so this works perfectly for that. Emma in the Night is also quite similar in terms of a lot of the mystery surrounding the story is set near the body of water, in this case the ocean. A lot of time is spent on an island. This is about 2 sisters who go missing one day. 3 years later, one of them comes back out of the blue, and they're trying to figure out what the hell happened to them, what happened to the other sister, and there is something about an island perhaps. When they go missing right at the edge of the ocean. The cars left there, they both disappeared and vanished there, so very central to the mystery again. And finally, I thought I'd give you a nonfiction recommendation because those were a little bit harder to find, but I finally found one. Kilo by Toby Muse. So listen, if you've been on my channel, I've talked about this book a lot last year. It was one of my favorite books of the year. I was absolutely blown away by how much of an impact it had on me. This is a very in-depth exploration of the cocaine cartels in Colombia, and it is a very grisly account of the production of cocaine from A to Z. And a central part of transporting cocaine is the people that transport across the ocean from South America to the US. And that's why I'm kind of plugging it in for this prompt. It was also a very quick read. It is not the smallest book, but it is a very compelling book. The narrative style for this nonfiction is very, very easily digestible and readable. It was absolutely fascinating. And yes, water, a large body of water, namely the ocean, plays a very large part in transporting the cocaine, as well as the Amazon River, I think they were saying. It plays a large part in the production of cocaine and like helping it get from point A to point B. So yes, it is very integral to what the book is trying to portray. So there's another one. And then your other prompt for the oh, that was my hip. Okay. The other prompt for the Targaryen path is read a book featuring siblings, and there's a lot more of those. That one wasn't as hard as the water prompt, so let's get into those. A couple of great ones for readathons, nice and short. First, we have the Wayward Children series by Shauna McGuire. So the first one here, Every Heart a Doorway. This series is about children who travel through portals into other worlds, and then when they come back to our real world, they are devastated. A lot of them are traumatized. They don't really know how to cope, and so they are often sent to Eleanor West's Home for Wayward Children, where they go through all sorts of therapy and meet other kids in similar situations. And so in this first book and the second one, I don't know about the others, you are following a set of twins who have gone to the same world and back together. So that would be a very good one for this prompt. The second book is Down Among the Sticks and Bones. I just read that one recently as well. This entire series is a series of novellas. They're extremely short, very easily readable. The audiobooks are pretty good. So this would be a great one if you're worried about not being able to finish all your books within the 2 weeks. Another one that I'm personally a huge fan of is the Tensered series by Neon Yang. So this is again a series of interconnected novellas. They could stand as standalones, but you're better off obviously reading them all because they're just so good. And it is this silk punk fantasy world, and you're following twins who were given up to a monastery at their birth because of some pact their mother made. Their very cruel, overbearing mother, who is very high up in the politics of this world. I don't remember much about the story specifically. It's been a while, and I read this, I literally swallowed this in one sitting. It was like fantastic and I loved it, but I did get the second one and I am planning on reading it at some point because I really loved it. But these are just phenomenal, very fairy tale-esque. Again, if you're looking for something a little bit shorter, because the readathon, I would really recommend these. They are criminally underhyped. There's not enough people reading these, I think, and I think that it's important to, you know, give a little love to some of those lesser talked about books. So I would really recommend these if you're stuck for the siblings prompt and you like fantasy. There are a ton of thrillers that have to do with siblings. I just talked about Emma in the Night. Obviously, these two sisters go missing. One comes back 3 years later. That is a good one for that. I also talked about Sharp Objects. There are siblings in that one as well. The reporter has a younger sister or stepsister. Regardless, there's a complicated sibling dynamic there too that's really interesting. And I also have The Good Daughter by Karen Slaughter. Now, if you watch my September wrap-up, you'll know that I DNF'd this, but it's not because like I hated it, it just wasn't really for me. But this is about two sisters who are forced into the woods at gunpoint when they are younger, and one of them runs for her life, the other is left behind. Down the road, you are following one of these sisters as there's a new tragedy that strikes their small hometown, and she's somehow caught up in it, and it's bringing back all these memories of her trauma. Again, this kind of sister family dynamic is really at the core of this, so this is a really good one, and despite being fairly long, it reads really quickly. I also realized that Full Metal Alchemist works perfectly for this prompt because the two main characters are brothers. Another short, quick, easy read. If you wanted something a bit more in the horror vein, we need to talk about Kevin by Lionel Scriver. Is terrifying but very heavily focused on family, and there is a set of siblings in the book. You are basically reading the letters that a woman is writing, and she's talking about all the events that happened leading up to this like horrific thing. I mean, a lot of people have seen the movie, but like, I don't know, I'm not gonna spoil too much, but basically the woman is just talking about like the family life and before she had her son and leading up to the birth of her son, and then the early years and the birth of her daughter, and kind of how interesting it was. There's a lot of themes of like motherhood and family. It's also a lot darker than that. Like, it is borderline horror. It's pretty freaking dark, but this is a good one if you're looking for, yeah, some kind of more like horror adjacent recommendation. And finally, The Joy Luck Club by Amy Tan actually does feature siblings. It talks about siblings and family relationships. This is a modern classic about a girl who goes to her mother's mahjong club after her mother passes. Her mother's mahjong club was basically a small group of Chinese American immigrants who decided to start up a club to maintain their culture and language and just have this very safe space to go to every week. And when the girl gets there, all the other members are telling her stories about her mother and their own experience as Chinese American immigrants. Beautiful, breathtaking. I fucking cried. And yes, it obviously features family and sibling dynamics, so it's perfect for this prompt. A pretty quick read and honestly a beautiful one. If the lighting and everything looks a little bit different, I took like 3 weeks off. My phone died when I was filming the first part, and then I could not film for a while, and now we're like 3 weeks later, so sorry if it's a little different, but we're gonna get back into it. So next we're gonna quickly move on to the King's Landing path. Of course, first prompt, the same anticipated read. Now your second prompt is to read a 5-star prediction. I cannot obviously give recommendations for these because everyone has their own 5-star predictions, but again, it's a pretty easy one. You should be able to find something that you're really looking forward to and that you think will be a 5-star read, whether it's a sequel in a series that you've started and that you think you're gonna love as much, if not more than the first, or it's just a new release that's really exciting that you think is gonna be right up your alley. Maybe it's by a favorite author. Whatever is a 5-star prediction for you, go for that. Your prompt after that, however, is the Iron Throne prompt, and this is to read a book about or featuring royalty. So there's a lot of fun ones for this. Fantasy is a huge genre that features a lot of royalty, so I'm gonna give a few recommendations for this one. One that I would really recommend is the Daevabad trilogy, starting with The City of Brass by S.A. Chakraborty. This is an adult fantasy, but it reads really, really quickly. It is following a woman who is a kind of a con artist in Cairo until one day she summons a Jinn warrior and is whisked off to Daevabad, the city of Jinn, and she finds out that she has some Jinn ancestry and she can heal people, and it's really, really interesting, this kind of alternate world. You are very, very closely following the royal family in Daevabad, so it really heavily features royalty, and like I said, this book is such a quick read. I think you'd have no problem reading the first one in the 2 weeks of the mini round of the readathon. This could also be a great opportunity for you to pick up the Song of Ice and Fire series. If you've not read it yet, but you've watched the show and you're interested, of course, there is royalty, so I'm gonna very quickly plug it because I feel like I have to recommend it at least once. I don't know if you, it depends on your reading speed, I don't know if you could read this in 2 weeks. I think I did read the first one in about that time because once you are familiar with the characters, it's a lot quicker to get through. I find the writing style really accessible. It's really character driven and emotional, and it's just fun to read, I find. So I think you could get through it, and if you haven't picked it up yet, if you're just a show person, this is a really good prompt to pick up this book for. One last fantasy one, The 100,000 Kingdoms by N.K. Jemisin. This one is fantastic because again, you are following a member of a royal family. So our main character here gets called to the capital where she is actually expected to participate in this kind of competition for the throne. So her and 2 of her cousins are the last ones that are alive that are in line for the throne, or at least they're the only ones that are in actual contention. They're the only ones competent enough to ascend. And while the current reigning is still alive, he is trying to figure out who his next successor will be. So you're kind of following her, but it's not a competition in like a Throne of Glass sense. It's more of a political game. There's a lot of backdoor dealings involved. And another really interesting thing about this book is that the gods in this world are enslaved to this royal family. So there's this really interesting dynamic of the way that the gods interact amongst themselves and with our main character and with the other members of the royal family. So this is a really, really good one. Again, really quick, the writing was really, really accessible in this. And if you have read and enjoyed N.K. Jemisin's other works and you have not picked this one up yet, I would really recommend it. One really quick nonfiction recommendation, Humans, A Brief History of How We Fucked It All Up by Tom Phillips. So as the title would suggest, this is a collection of stories from history of people fucking up royally, and that includes people in power, whether it's governments or monarchs. And this one was really fun. It was a really, really quick read. If you can, I would also really suggest listening to the audiobook. That could be a great audiobook pick if you don't like reading like 3 books like physically. This audiobook is great. It's very conversational. It almost feels kind of like a podcast, and you do follow some royals who made big boo-boos. So this one's really, really fun. a really quick and accessible nonfiction. I think even if you don't love nonfiction, this could be a great one for you. And finally, we're gonna go over the Lannister path. So again, first prompt, we'll skip past that. Your second prompt is to read a lesser talked about book. Now, this one could be a little bit subjective, but I'm still gonna give you a few examples of books that I don't see talked about that often, but that I really, really loved, and I think you could too. A very obvious one for me is the Tensert series. Again, this is a series of novellas that I don't see anyone reading, honestly, but like, first of all, the cover, I thought booktube would be all over these. They are spectacular, they are short, they're like fairy tales packed into these tiny little books. You can read them in one sitting. They're fantastic, and like, I don't know why more people don't read these, especially because I feel like Asian fantasy has been having a lot of popularity lately, so I don't know why this one isn't as big, especially because the premise is so unique. Anyways, I have raved about this first book for a long time. I'm really excited to read the second one, and I think that if you have not heard of these, if you have not picked them up, they're a great choice. They fill multiple prompts in the readathon, and it's always good to support like smaller authors. One that I am shocked I do not hear more people talk about is the Dreamblood duology by N.K. Jemisin. This is a bind up, don't be scared. There are 2 books in here. They're each about 400 pages, so they're not terribly long. And I find, again, they're so accessible. This is my favorite of the N.K. Jemisin books that I've read so far. This is set in this ancient Egyptian inspired city. You are following several people, several point of views, but there is a religious conflict with the politics. You're following a king, again, royalty prompt, this could work too. You are following someone who is a delegate from another city visiting. There is blood magic involved and dream magic. It's just infinitely interesting. It's absolutely fascinating. There's priests who are actually assassins. There's kings that are mad with power. There's just so much good stuff in here. And yet everyone talks about the 5th season, and as good as that series is, I didn't love the first book. I'm not gonna continue it, but this has such a hold on me, and I don't know why this isn't beloved more. This made me cry, this made me laugh, it turned me on. It was so good. So many good things, and this is definitely like an underrated fave, and I wish more people would read it. Nonfiction in general is not talked about as much. I can definitely pinpoint a few like popular ones, so I'll give a few that I haven't heard actually anyone talk about, but that I personally really enjoyed. So I have Blitzed by Norman Ohler. This is the account of Matthews, essentially, in the Third Reich, before and during World War II. This was just a really unique look into history and kind of an alternate perspective on why Hitler made some of the decisions that he did, and kind of changes our perceptions about certain military tactics used by Germany during World War II. But I think even if you're not a huge military buff, this book was still very accessible. I thought it was really interesting. There's things that I would definitely research further, and it's a really quick read. And it's like, honestly, like anyone with a passing knowledge of World War II could still really enjoy this one. And surprisingly, I haven't heard anyone on BookTube talk about it ever, but it's one of my favorite nonfiction books. If you're looking for something a little bit less heavy, A Brief History of Vice by Robert Evans is a great pick. This is like a series of articles almost about bad behavior in humanity, and it's just so much fun. It talks about drugs and drinking and swearing and porn and prostitution and all of these like things that we consider bad behavior, and it really kind of takes a look at how they've actually shaped society and how they've evolved over time. The author also tends to do some very unadvisable experimentation, which is so fun to read about, but like I would never, but it's just such a fun book. It's really easy to dip in and out of, which I think is also probably great for Readathon. If you want to break between some of your fiction books, this is great to just kind of pick up, read one of the chapters, and then move on with your day and then come back to later. And again, I've never heard anyone talk about this, but I think this is such an accessible book for non-fiction readers, and I think everyone should honestly give it a try because it's so much fun. And so our final prompt for the Lannister path is to read a book with red on the cover. So a lot of the books I've already talked about have red on the cover. Do a little rapid fire. Again, Battle Royale, a lot faster than it looks to read, a lot of red on the cover. A really good one. I want more people to read this. The Dreamblood duology, I think even the books when they're separate, not like in a bind up, The first one does have red on the cover, if I'm not mistaken. A few that I haven't mentioned though. So we have Inkheart by Cornelia Funk. Now I know I talk about this book a fair amount. It's kind of like a middle grade / younger young adult about a girl and her father who's a bookbinder, and her father has a gift to read people out of books, and you're kind of following their journey, in this book at least, trying to put someone back into a book because they're wreaking havoc on the real world. It seems long, it's beautifully written, but because it is kind of middle grade / young adult, it's definitely a lot quicker to read, and I think it's perfect for fall. I put it in my fall recommendations video if you have not seen that. There's some good recommendations in there too, but this book is just absolutely phenomenal, and I think that it'd be perfect for a readathon in case you're reading other like heavier books, some adult fantasy or maybe some thrillers or something. This would be a really good kind of palate cleanser because it's just a little easier to read and it's a little bit slower. It's a little bit more like about the atmosphere and the vibes rather than action and relationships almost. You really focus on the setting and being painted this vivid picture in your mind. I love this series so much, but yeah, the first book is clearly very read and I'm gonna keep shouting about this book. So another one for my fall recommendations video that I think would be great during the readathon is The 7 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. So this is kind of a sci-fi mystery where you're following a main character who wakes up in a different person's body every day. He has 7 days to solve the mystery of who killed Evelyn Hardcastle, and you're basically trying to piece together everything as the main character does, because every day when he wakes up in someone else's body at this like manor dinner party where it happens, he has no recollection of the previous day's memories. So it's really chaotic, it's really fun. You're trying to put everything together even though you don't have the full picture, and you're just completely confused, but in the best way possible. And I think that's going to be perfect for a readathon. I love this book. I've been screaming about it for a long time too, because this is one of the first books I picked up from BookTube, and it's still kind of one of my favorites in terms of the mystery genre. I think it's so unique, and for me, I found the end really satisfying personally. Not everyone did, but I kind of like that speculative element, so I would really recommend this one. And so that is it. Those were some recommendations for all of the prompts of the A Game of Tomes readathon, the origin story mini round that is happening very soon, starting on November 1st. I really hope you can join us. If you need more details, once again, everything will be linked down below. We have a very complete website that goes through the whole story if you want to kind of see how we got to all these prompts and why they are the way that they are. We also have everyone's links down below. Please go check out my co-hosts' videos. They did a great job. They're a little bit shorter than mine. I tend to ramble a lot, so you know, if you're interested in a little bit more rapid fire, you can go check them out. My social media is also linked down below. You guys can always come talk to me there. Other than that, thank you so much for watching. I hope to see you on November 1st, and I will see you also in the next video. Bye!